the biggest issue with Bernie he had these radicalized folks, most of them out of the Bay Area, that were a cross between Indians, hippies, juvenile delinquents, to thoughtful people. I mean, there were lots of things going on in their makeup when they arrived in town. And Bernie's great attribute was he figured out what wars he wanted to fight and what wars he didn't want to fight. And so there were periods when we were still camped out at the fort that Bernie kept the radicalized, violent section, drug-addicted section of those folks away from the media, away from cops, away from the mayor and the county executive. And to do that, Bernie would be essentially negotiating with the city and the county and the feds. See, the issue in that whole thing over the fort was the Army was going to abandon the land. And there's a whole series of federal regulations as to the priority of who can be entitled to the next claim on those lands after the military is done with it. And a guy named Gary Bass, who's Colville, which is what Bernie is, but a lawyer, sole practice, not very radicalized practice at all. But he and Bernie, I think, are the two critical people to focus on the federal regulations as to how they can take advantage of it. And so Bernie would be with Gary and two or three others at every kind of governmental level, quietly behind the scenes, negotiating a position that the Native community could live with. He wanted something to come from this. I mean, we're not going to get the whole fort. That is not amongst the realistic thing. He could keep his eye on the ball of a something happening in Seattle. How it was going to shape was unclear at the time. But when this was over, there was going to be something for the state of Washington and Seattle's Indian community off reservation. That was the ball. And he never lost sight of that. The Duwamish, wanted to make a big issue out of the fact that, to a certain extent, the grant of the land from the Duwamish to the Army in 1916 or whatever it was whether they violated the terms of that and it should default back to the Indian people. The probabilities of that happening were so slim that why waste our time? Yet you can make a lot of political statements by adhering blindly to that position. And but that was not Bernie's pursuit. He wanted something when it was all over and done with. And he and Gary are probably the two most important members of that effort. Now that's going on during the day. At night, I mean, he is in the face of some of these radical guys. I mean, and I'm here to tell you, more than once, they're rolling in the dirt. Somebody could very easily get hurt. But he was not going to let some drug idiot, do anything to disturb the public image of the movement, if you will. So, I mean, there were times he'd go 3-4 days without so much as 20 minutes of sleep. He was up all day doing what leaders do with the community, and staying up all night trying to keep his people in line. And very, very focused. And you know, he's Green Beret, Vietnam vet. You know, when he was buried in his full military uniform. Extremely proud of that history. And which incidentally is something that is true almost across the board to a much greater extent than almost any other kind of community you can identify, is the pride of a lot of Indians in their military history. Those are the kinds of memories I have, are the most vivid. I've equated many times Bernie to the Indian world's equivalent of Martin Luther King Jr. He had that kind of power. There's only two guys that I'm aware of nationwide, politically out of an Indian program, that survived more than 10 years. I mean this somewhat facetiously, but it makes my point. Indians can be cannibals to their leadership. It is very, very difficult to retain any kind of political power in the tribal world for any length of time. And when you're on the outs, you're not just voted out. You are, boy, there's a word I'm looking for, but you are an anathema. And but Bernie and a guy named Joe Dela Cruz from the Quinaults, those two guys both had national positions of respect and honor in the Indian world for well over 20 years. And very bright men, very good leaders. I can share, to me, one of the most incredible political stories of how you retain power. That Bernie, the 15-year anniversary of the invasion, they have a big banquet at the Sheraton downtown. 200 plus people are invited, and there is a dais of all kinds of extremely important people, current people, and some of the leaders from, I think, Mayor Ullman. Spellman was the county exec in the time of the invasion, and they're there at the dais. There's 2 or 3 former governors. I think Booth Gardner was the current governor, but I don't think he was able to make it that night. I can't remember. But anyway, there must have been 20 important people at this, very important people at this dais. And so it's time to start the festivities of the ceremony. Bernie, rather than introducing the dais to the audience, introduced the audience to the dais. And he went around that room and said why every single person in that room was there. Wow. And he had a story about something from Fort Lawton days. And I mean, I'd have voted for him for God at that point.